produced this legislation for us. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, as we all know, the Senate and House agriculture leaders unveiled the long-awaited conference report last week for the 2014 Farm Bill. It's been a long trip getting this far. Every conference committee, of course, has some controversy. But the 2014 Farm Bill, I think it's had more than its fair share of twists and turns, right down to the negotiations on dairy policy and the fleeting hours before we as conferees signed this conference report. It's not like in the old days, the perils of Pauline, but we had the Farm Bill tied to the railroad tracks. We're about to head over the dairy cliff. Fortunately, we had Chairwoman Stabenow and Ranking Member Cochran and their superb staffs. And I would say I am blessed with also a superb staff. And then we end up with a bipartisan, bicameral farm bill that addresses the needs of every region in the country. Senator Stabenow and I were on the phone or emailing about every hour of the day and night and weekends from Michigan and Vermont, from overseas, from here, but it worked. Everybody got a chance. Republicans and Democrats alike got a chance to express their views. So now it's time to vote. Pass the bill. Send it to the President, but give sorely needed certainty to our farmers and our families, our rural communities. After all, the 2014 Farm Bill saves taxpayers $23 billion. It eliminates duplicative programs. It strengthens the toolbox for conserving our natural resources. It gives some farmers much needed but long overdue certainty as they make planting decisions. They don't have the luxury that we seem to give ourselves of waiting to the very last second and voting on something. They have to plan months in advance. But also provides relief to struggling families, support for rural communities, investments in a sustainable energy future. Now, is it a perfect bill? Of course not. No farm bill is. And while it includes provisions I would not have preferred, I do believe that it has a lot of provisions that will benefit Vermont and the nation. I wish that the common sense dairy policies that were passed twice by the full Senate, supported by Republicans and Democrats, by the chair and by the ranking members, and also by the House Agriculture Committee, I wish they hadn't been ambushed in the other body at the last hour. As a result, we don't have a market stabilization program, something that was proposed by dairy farmers themselves, and a program that would have protected taxpayers from exorbitant costs. It would have insulated dairy farmers and consumers from volatile, roller-coasting milk prices. But unfortunately, the Speaker of the House and some of the very powerful, huge industry figures from out west did not want it. But we do have, because of the constant work of everybody, and I, again, would praise the chair of our own committee, Senator Stabenow, we have a solution that, while not perfect, will help our small dairy farms to protect themselves from poor economic conditions when milk prices plummet or when feed prices skyrocket, or, as we've sometimes seen, the worst scenario, when both happen at the same time. The final Farm Bill includes changes to lower the cost of the Margin Protection Program for Vermont's small family dairy farms. It will also discourage large dairies from using this program to flood the markets through overproduction of milk, something that wipes out small family farms. But the bill's not just about farmers. It's also a food bill that supports hungry children and struggling families. And it has healthy food initiatives. I'm disappointed the final bill contains any cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But the conferees, we worked together and we rejected the deepest cuts to the hunger safety net and the most harmful new conditions which were advocated by an extreme majority in the House, both of which would have undermined the very reason we offer food assistance. Their provisions would have slashed nearly $40 billion from nutrition assistance programs. It would have eliminated eligibility for millions of Americans. It would have made it harder for needy, hungry children to receive free school meals. And frankly, Mr. President, I am fed up of hearing members, whether in the House or sometimes members in this body, say, oh, we can't afford to feed these hungry children. They go to school. These are the same members that voted for a blank check to go to an unnecessary war in Iraq, something that's cost us $2 trillion. They did it on a credit card to go to war in Iraq. Feed children in America so they might actually learn when they're at school? Oh, we can't afford that. Come on. Feeding those hungry children is an investment in the future of this great nation. And some of the demeaning and offensive provisions, such as allowing drug testing of beneficiaries and unrealistic work requirements, those were left out. You have somebody who's been a tax-paying, hard-working citizen for decades, and then the factory closes and they're out trying to find more work and they need supplemental nutrition to feed themselves and their family. Are we going to demean them after what they've done for the country up to that point? Of course not. And the legislation, though, promotes food security in low-income communities. It encourages healthy eating through increased access to fruits and vegetables. That's something, an approach that we've done in Vermont for years. It's also one of the reasons, that and the fact that we cover every child from birth to 18 years old for health care. It's one of the reasons Vermont is always listed as either #1 or #2 healthiest state in the nation. But the legislation also, and again I compliment the chair on this, it continues a shared responsibility to conserve our working farmland and our natural resources. You lose these natural resources, this farmland, they don't make it anymore. You're not going to get it back. Federally supported crop insurance will ease farmers' exposure when natural disasters strike. They'll keep working lands in production. But meanwhile, enlisting farmers to continue the simple conservation practices that they're already following will ensure the protection of our wetlands and our sensitive lands. In a country as diverse as ours, it's no simple task to produce a farm bill that addresses the need of every region or every industry or every priority. But I am proud that this is a bill that offers a targeted approach to tackling the needs of each state and agriculture sector, rather than doing the easy way would be a one-size-fits-all, which, when you end up, doesn't fit anybody. The Regional Equity Program guarantees that no state is left out from receiving conservation resources under the Farm Bill. Not only Vermont communities, but rural America everywhere will be strengthened by a broadband development program, energy efficiency initiatives, and water treatment and distribution loans. Vermont's very beautiful Northeast Kingdom, their REAP zone, will continue to be a catalyst for growth and progress, building a resilient rural economy. Organic agriculture is supported through certification cost share and stronger enforcement and crop insurance and funding for organic research, which we should do. It's the fastest growing sector in agriculture. I'm also pleased that many of the harmful provisions from the House Farm Bill were removed during the conference negotiations, including dangerous secrecy provisions, and attacks on critical environmental regulations, and one that was proposed by an extremely conservative Republican would have actually threatened to limit states' rights. What an amazing turn of event. We got rid of that. So, bottom line, the Senate and the House have produced a farm bill that at its core is about keeping America strong. Now, make no mistake, farming is part of our national security. Look at the number of nations in this world that would give anything to be able to feed themselves and have food left over to export. We're more secure as a nation because we can do that. This farm bill will boost the economy, will create jobs, will offer support to the hungry, will conserve our natural resources, it will improve our energy security, it will stand up for our country's families. I am proud to sign the conference report, another farm bill that will support Americans today into America's future. I look forward to one of my few duties I get to do. After this bill passes, the Speaker will sign it. I will sign it as President pro tem. I know from what he has said to all of us, the President will then sign it. I yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
Yeah. I'm going to address a small part of this bill, but a very important part of a bill. It's something I've been working on through at least 2 farm bills. And since the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee is here, Senator Stabenow, I thank her for defending my position up till the last day or 2 of the conference. And she kept me informed fully about the difficulty of the position that both houses had taken getting that out of conference. So I come to the floor not to discuss just my issue, but to use it as an example that that my colleagues may look forward to the future, that just because something goes through the United States Senate, even without controversy, because it wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't discussed, there wasn't any amendment offered to strike what I'm talking about that came out of committee, and it passed in the House of Representatives by a 230 to 194 vote in the same language, that you would assume that something that was the same in both houses would not be changed by the conference. In fact, Rule 28 of the Senate rules says this: conferees shall not insert in their report matters not committed to them by either house, nor shall they strike from the bill matter agreed to by both houses. So if you're interested in the Senate rules being followed by conference committees in the future, understand in this particular case it was not followed, because the provisions weren't necessarily struck, but they were changed in such a manner that really the $387 million that the Congressional Budget Office said would be saved if my provisions stayed in, that amount of money will not be saved. And we're talking about a situation that we're trying to correct here, going back at least to the 2008 Farm Bill and maybe previous to that, where 10% of the biggest farmers get 70% of the benefits from the farm program. So it's subsidizing farmers as opposed to helping medium and small farmers get through conditions like natural disaster, politics, other things beyond the control of farmers, that the safety net for farmers was intended to help. So we could have saved $387 million. The rules of the Senate said that this should have been in the final package that come back to the United States Senate, but it's not here, and it seems to me my colleagues ought to be aware of that fact, because they may be in a similar situation sometime on some other conference committee report. And the question is, are you going to let a small number of people, for most of this conference report, 4 people negotiating difference between the House and Senate, speak for the other 531 members of the Congress? And are you going to let a majority of that group people represent a minority of the Senate and a minority of the House? And that's by this being taken out or this being changed in such a way so it has no value, that's exactly what has happened. Making sure that we have limits on the amount of money that a farmer can get and real numbers at work is not something new. President Bush vetoed a farm bill in 2008 because he said it continues subsidies for the wealthy. In another part of his veto message, he said the American taxpayer should not be forced to subsidize that group of farmers who have adjusted gross incomes up to $1.5 million as a rationale for vetoing that bill. So what we have here is the moral authority of a majority of the Senate, a moral authority of the House of Representatives, and their positions taken on this language that limited a farmer to no more than $250,000 and defining a farmer as somebody who's actually engaged in the business of farming so that non-farmers don't get help from the farm program has been taken out regardless of the moral authority that said that it should be kept in the bill. In other words, conferees taking out something that represented a minority of the House of Representatives and a minority of the United States Senate. So we're here to vote on a farm bill. Cloture today, final passage tomorrow. The farm bill is a very important safety net for producers. Gives farmers a chance to survive in tough times. As a farmer, I understand the risk of farming. My payment limit reforms were adopted, as I can't say too many times, in both bodies of Congress. It would have saved $387 million. And people said that when we limited, through my amendment, that you could have one non-farming manager per farming operation, they were saying that that was unreasonable. There would have been a lot of money saved with that, but more importantly, you would have had a situation where non-farmers, as is the situation today, and will probably be the situation in the future, are going to be able to get benefits from a farm program when they don't have any legitimacy for that. This provision should not have been touched because it was the same in both houses. Unlimited subsidies that I said when 10% of the biggest farmers get 70% of the benefits from the farm program actually put a new generation of farmers, the young and beginning farmers, at a severe disadvantage. You know, there's nothing wrong with farmers getting bigger. That's the American dream, to use your potential to the best you can to do the best for yourself. But frankly, when farmers that shouldn't be getting big payments from the farm program get them, subsidizing large farmers to get larger is, in my estimation, wrong. And particularly when it drives up the price of land, as it have in the recent 5 to 8 years, drives up the price of cash rent as it has recently, it's very difficult for people that are just trying to get into the business of farming to start out. And so I think our farm program, where you can have non-farmers qualifying for the farm program, being managers when they might not even be making a phone call to the operation, and having limits that don't mean much, that's exactly what we're doing, subsidizing big farmers to get bigger and young and beginning farmers being at a severe disadvantage. Changing my reforms behind closed doors, as I said, is wrong. The House and Senate had spoken on the issue. No debate in the Senate here. 230 to 194 vote in support of the Fortenberry Amendment in the House of Representatives. Something that under the Senate rules is the same in both bodies, should not be messed with by the conferees, but it was changed very dramatically. Some are saying that the effort that the conferees took to give the United States Department of Agriculture authority to bring about some of these reforms on who's actually engaged in the business of farming will do the job. But they've had that authority for the long time. And I see this as a Washington hat trick to say you've done something when you haven't done anything. So I'm not going to be able to vote for this bill because it would endorse what has happened, egregious manipulation behind closed doors of something that's the same in both houses should not be tolerated, and I hope my colleagues will take that into consideration so it doesn't happen to them in the future. How we will fix other entitlement programs if we can't cut subsidies to millionaire farmers who don't even farm makes it very difficult. And as I said, my friend from Michigan, the chairwoman Stabenow, has worked hard on this bill. I really wanted to support this farm bill. I just can't get over what happened behind closed doors once again here in Washington, and I know, as she has told me so many times, she's defended my position, and I thank her for doing that. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate's been debating the farm bill that was passed in the House last week. We are expecting a steady stream of remarks from senators as they get closer to final passage throughout the day today. A vote on final passage is expected tomorrow, and of course we'll have live coverage of that vote when it happens. We'll also keep a vote tally as the votes come in tomorrow, and you can see it all here on C-SPAN 2. The House also in today. Members are in recess right now. They will return at 5 Eastern and continue debate on a couple of bills, actually begin debate on a couple of bills, including one that would require colleges to give veterans in-state tuition rates regardless of their place of residence. Later this week, a bill easing federal restrictions on hunters and fishermen. You can see the House live when they gavel in on our companion network, C-SPAN. A quick reminder that our First Ladies program is tonight. We're showing you all the First Ladies. Tonight it is Laura Bush, and that'll be tonight beginning at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN and C-SPAN 3. Correction, it's 9 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN and C-SPAN 3.
President.
Senator from South Dakota. North Dakota.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about something that is,
We have to just...
ask that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection. The senator from North Dakota.
In North Dakota, in spite of all of the discussion about our great energy renaissance and all of the above and the new manufacturing, and yes, we are going to be a test site for the unmanned aircraft, in North Dakota, we live and we breathe agriculture. In summer, our plains are filled with beautiful sunflowers and canola fields and flax, and if you've never seen a field of flax, I'll send you a picture. It's the most amazing view, especially when the canola is next to the flax. Our ranchers take serious pride in their cattle herds that graze around much of our state. And the wheat, grain, corn, and soybeans farmers provide help feed the world and are the best products produced in agriculture today. Agriculture also supports 16 million jobs around the country, including thousands of manufacturing jobs in North Dakota. This is not surprising given that our state is one of the most productive farm states in the country. Those jobs make it possible for our state to continue to harvest each year, supporting families across North Dakota, but also throughout the country. I take great pride in the work our farmers and ranchers do. I know all North Dakotans do as well. For too long, we weren't supporting them enough to enable them to do their jobs. In fact, we held farmers and ranchers in limbo because they haven't been sure on how to prepare for this crop year since Congress had not done its job and passed a farm bill. But finally, that's about to change. During my campaign, I pledged to work tirelessly to get a long-term farm bill passed. Now we are literally at the one-yard line of finally reaching the goal of passing a 5-year bipartisan farm bill. I'm incredibly proud of the work we have done and what we have almost accomplished. And I do have to give a shout out to our tremendous chairwoman, Senator Debbie Stabenow, who, as Senator Hoeven put it, she's a tough negotiator. And I think that's one thing everybody who is tough but fair and absolutely remarkable, not only this year, but also in 2013 and 2012, and never resists an opportunity to inform anyone who crosses her path about the importance to the economy of this country that a long-term farm bill positions us much better to be competitive in the world. You know, one thing that we talk about a lot here is the budget and about long-term systemic reforms that can give us what in public policy we need to do, such as a safety net for farmers, but also reduce costs to taxpayers. This farm bill saves $23 billion in federal dollars while still providing one of the strongest safety nets for farmers and ranchers ever crafted in a long-term farm bill. It makes critical reforms to target resources where they are most needed while also giving farmers the opportunity to thrive. This farm bill achieves that goal and puts our agricultural system in a strong position to continue its role as a world leader. This is achieved through effective farm program for growers, livestock disaster coverage for ranchers and livestock producers, enhanced crop insurance offerings, expanded research, which is so critical to so many of our new crops, increased export production for agricultural products, critical investments in biofuels and in energy, a renewal of the sugar program to prevent excess imports of unfairly subsidized foreign sugar, and targeted conservation assistance to tackle the unique problems in this country, particularly in my state with Devil's Lake and the Red River Valley. You know, in North Dakota, we grow more than 20 different crops each year, and we lead the nation in the production of 13 different commodities, including spring wheat, durum wheat, barley, edible beans, peas and lentils, canola, sunflowers, and flaxseed. So while we talk about this expansion and really explosion of both corn and soybeans, I can tell you that North Dakota is leading the way in diversification, which I think is the future for agriculture. North Dakota is also a leading livestock state with thousands of cow-calf operators raising livestock in the West and a leading producer of sugar beets from growers in the Red River Valley. Approximately 25% of my state's economic base and employment are derived from that work that's done on the farm. And I talk about this quite a bit because I think when you think about economics and you think about what generates economic activity, at the very beginning, you have to have new wealth creation. And in this country, new wealth creation comes from what we extract from the earth, how we use our resources, and it comes from importation of goods and services, or exportation of our goods and services. That's new wealth creation, and farming is such a critical component. And when you think about that, you realize that our farmers and ranchers help grow the economy and reduce our nation's trade deficit. North Dakota alone exported more than $4.1 billion in commodities this year, contributing to a farm cash receipts of over $7.6. But to simply put in a crop, North Dakota growers, this is an average grower in North Dakota, spends upwards to $1 million in input costs with the hope of earning a modest profit, a modest return on that investment at the end of the year. What's more, each year North Dakota faces challenges completely out of their control, like floods, droughts, price collapse, and the introduction of new pests and pathogens. What's more, each year North Dakota growers face an incredible risk with, in the last 2 years, the uncertainty of not having a farm bill. They are able to do this. They're able to take the risk because the rest of the country takes a little bit of risk with them for that food security and that national security that American agriculture provides. For too long, this body's debated farm and rural policies in place in our country without providing the needed certainty to America. Soon, in just a few hours, we'll have the opportunity to prevail by putting rural America on strong grounds by passing a comprehensive, long-term farm bill that stands up for our ranchers and our producers and stands up for the people who consume agricultural products in this country. And to my way of thinking, I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on this bill. It's good for my state, it's good for the country, and it's good for the world. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe I have 20 to 30 minutes. I would appreciate it if you would let me know when I've consumed 15 minutes.
Senator will be so notified.
I come to the floor. I've been in the Congress for a lot of farm bills. Seen a lot of things tried. Saw freedom to farm. Saw the last farm bill. Saw the one before that. And I'm looking at this one. And it reminds me of the commercial, the auto commercial, something's up. Something's up. Well, it sure is. Only in Washington can we claim a bill saves $24 billion when it increases the spending 43% over the next 10 years. How's it fit? Is that just the language of Washington? In fact, we're going to spend almost $1 trillion over the next 10 years on what should be called a food security bill rather than a farm bill, because this isn't a farm bill, this is a food security bill. And the language that we hear from our colleagues is totally parochial or product-based. And we hear all the claims that we're thinking about the best interests of the nation. What we're really thinking about is the best interests of the parochial values from our own states. And that's how you get this conflagration of people coming together to pass a bill that, I admit, has some limited reforms in it. But I just heard the senator from North Dakota talk about how we create wealth. I couldn't disagree more. We create wealth by making sure the risk of capital investment are responsive to market forces. This farm bill is anything but that. There's no response to market forces because there's no place else in this country where you can go into a business or an enterprise and being guaranteed that your revenue is going to be secure. We've even added a new supplemental low-cost crop insurance program that all of us who aren't farmers in America are going to pay the deductible on. Plus, we're going to subsidize 62 to 63% of all the crop insurance in the country. So when we subsidize crop insurance, what we're doing is we're taking the capital risk and we're modifying the risk. And so therefore markets aren't going to work. And so we talk about sugar prices. Americans are losing candy manufacturers like crazy. Why is that? Because Americans pay twice as much as the rest of the world for sugar. Because we're protecting cane sugar and beet sugar farmers rather than let market forces work. I'm really disturbed at the process of this bill as well. Senator Durbin and I tried to put some income limitations on the benefits to the wealthiest in this country when it comes to crop insurance. It passed this Senate with 64-65 votes. It was in the bill when it left here. The House passed the same thing by a voice vote, and the conferees took it out. What's the Farm Bill really about? It's about protecting the well-heeled and the well-connected in the agricultural community. I know a little bit about agriculture. My dad ran a ranch with 5,000 mother cows. I worked on it summer and after schools. Back then, in the 70s, there were no benefits for a cattle rancher. That's all come into the farm programs since the 70s, guaranteeing them that now they'll make decisions that are against market forces, but will farm the government. So I'd say again, only in Washington, when we're going to spend $350 billion more on a program over the next 10 years, will somebody claim that we're cutting spending $14 to $20 billion. Only in Washington will that happen. It's unique Washington accounting. And we've heard all the proponents say what a great job they did. Well, let me talk a little bit about some of the details of this farm bill. You know, one of the things the President talked about, he just put Joe Biden in charge of job training program. Looking at all of them, seeing if they have metrics. The GAO has studied that. I've actually looked at every job training state and federal in my state. They had 10 job training pilot programs in this bill. We don't need any more job programs. What we need to do is make sure the ones we got work and have metrics on them. Make sure that when we spend American taxpayers' dollars, that we're actually giving somebody a life skill rather than filling the coffers of the companies that contract to do all this job training programs and the small bureaucracies that suck up the grants. Because in Oklahoma, their federal programs are highly ineffective, especially when you compare them to the state-run programs, which are highly effective. So in this farm bill, we're creating more job training programs. Sounds good. It's a good soundbite on the floor, good soundbite at home in the press. But something's up. And what is up is we continue to make the same mistakes as the legislative body. And that mistake is we want to please constituents at home more than we want to fix the real problems in front of this nation. Let me talk about the SNAP program for a minute. There's not anybody in this country that I want to go hungry. But when this country was first founded, we used some very good principles that the Senate and the House have totally disregarded in terms of how you help people. And I referenced the historical blueprint on this from a book that was written by a man by the name of Marvin Olasky. And the title of that book was called The Tragedy of American Compassion. How did we used to help people versus how are we helping them now? How did we build up people as we helped them versus now how are we tearing down people as we help them? Creating dependency versus creating responsibility. And he outlined several factors that this country has used in the past that we ought to be re-embracing. And let me just list a couple of them. One is we should give relief to people only after one-on-one personal investigation of their need. Let me say that again. We ought to know they need it. Because contrast where the money's coming from. The money's not coming from today's taxpayer when we're running a $640 billion deficit. The money's coming from our kids and our grandkids. And do we not have an obligation to know that when we give somebody a SNAP card, that they really need it? Versus the fact that the SNAP cards get sold, the PIN number gets sold, and the SNAP card's used by somebody else, and I take my cash. It's going on all throughout this country. And that's not to say that most of the people who are getting this benefit don't need it. But because there's no personal investigation into it, no accountability on the part of the receiver or the giver, we're creating a situation in our country where we're undermining self-reliance. The second point he made was to give necessary articles and only what is immediately necessary. That means you have to investigate it. To give what is least susceptible to abuse. To give only in small quantities and in proportion to immediate needs, and less than might be procured by labor, except in cases of sickness. That's a great principle. Let's help people, but let's help people help themselves. And let's don't create a situation of temptation to do the wrong thing. To give assistance at the right moment, not to prolong it beyond duration of the necessity which calls for it. We don't do that at all in any of our programs. To require of each beneficiary absence from intoxicating liquors and drugs. To discontinue relieving all who manifest a purpose to depend on alms rather than support their own exertions for support. I don't have one problem paying my taxes to make sure people don't go hungry and that have food on the table for their kids. You know, I just watched a video my daughter had referred to me, and it's a documentary. And I have to say, as a physician, understanding the scientific tests and the great research that was in this, it's called Forks Over Knives. And it makes the case that most of our health care costs are based on our diet. And it's very, very accurate and very well done. Except we have no limitations. Senator Harkin and I, for years, have tried to get limitations on how food stamps and SNAP cards are used. We can't budge anybody to say that we ought to limit it to healthy foods. Because for every dollar we're spending on food, we're creating a dollar in health care costs down the road. And I'd recommend my colleagues watch that study. It is unbelievable in terms of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension. No medicines, just change diets, and all of a sudden those things go away. They go away. Because we take big agribusinesses push to use what is profitable out of the food chain and then start supplying foods that actually are good for us. It seems to me that Congress looks backwards instead of forwards when it comes to the Farm Bill. One of the things we ought to do is look at the world and what the population is. I also want to say that some of the hardest working people in this country are the people who are in agriculture. I don't say these things to demean them, but markets really do work, and we really hurt our farmers when we take them away from market forces, because that will cause them to make decisions that are false choices when it comes to capital investment. And those are false choices for our country, because that means capital's going into something that's subsidized by the government rather than going into something that's not subsidized that will create a greater good and more wealth for our country. This bill does exactly that. You realize that in this bill, you're guaranteed 86% of your revenue. Let me think about that. You know anywhere else where you can get your revenue on your crops guaranteed at 86%, and the federal taxpayers paying most of the cost of the insurance for that? Individuals in Oklahoma and Maine and Virginia are paying higher tax dollars so we can create a system where we're investing in crops, one, that aren't necessarily good for us, two, that cause us to pay a higher price for domestically produced crop versus world markets, whereas we could redirect those same inputs into a product that's much better for us and we'll be much more competitive in. One of the points I would make, in 2013, net farm income was $131 billion. That's 16.5% over what it was the year before, in an economy that's only growing less than 2%. And yet we're going to spend almost $100 billion a year in the future, of which only 15% of that, 18% of that, will be for agricultural programs outside of the food stamp program. We're going to spend $18 billion to misdirect capital in a way that in the long run we won't see that kind of growth. I'll finish up with just other commentary. It is necessary we have a farm program. But there's one little trick in this farm bill that everybody ought to be aware of. It's the pressure for the next farm bill that's put in this farm bill. And you know what it is? They didn't eliminate any of the permanent law that's on the books. They just let it stay there, and then we created a farm bill for 5 years. What's the purpose of that?
Senator has consumed 15 minutes.
Thank you. The purpose of that is so in 10 years, and in 5 years when we come to another farm bill, the default position will fall back to 40s area agricultural law, which will create pressure to do a farm bill. And if we do the same thing next time, it's going to cost $1.5 trillion over the following 10 years. My best friend is a feed corn, soybean, and wheat farmer. Farms in excess of 2,000 acres in Oklahoma. I actually, on breaks when they're harvesting, I go down and drive a grain buggy. I've only bent the auger on it once. I get to hear it from the farmer's perspective. You know what he tells me? We don't need any of this anymore. We don't need it. We need decisions on capital investment to be made on risk and markets. You can't tell me when we've got $131 billion in net farm income this year that we need to be subsidizing 86% of everybody's product, guaranteeing them no matter what happens to both yield or price, you're going to get 86%. And the American taxpayer the cost of this bill isn't just the $1 trillion that we're talking about. It's going to be much higher. And I'll make one final point. We've had historic high commodity prices, and they've moderated somewhat. But if they go back anywhere close to historical prices, this bill is going to cost at least another $100 billion, just in one program alone. And CBO's assumption is that we're not going to do that. But most of the leading agricultural economists in this country think corn's going to be under $4. It's going to be $3.75, and that wheat will decline, and soybeans will decline. So the score you have on this bill is nonsense, because it doesn't reflect the reality of what's happening out there. I would say I appreciate the hard work that the people on the Farm Bill did. I'm highly critical of adding new job programs. I think that you've missed it completely. You don't even know what the real problem is in terms of job training in this program. And it's 10 pilot programs that aren't going to make a difference anywhere. What we ought to have is real programs that are WTO compliant, that reconnect capital investment with the real world forces of market prices and markets. You know, we spend $200 million a year just on one program, assisting farmers selling their products overseas. You know what sells products overseas? Price, quality. But we got a little $200 million program that everybody in organized agriculture gets to take advantage of. Get a couple of trips a year on the federal taxpayer. It ought not be so. If you want to promote your product, you ought to be out promoting it. We shouldn't be promoting private brands with federal government money. We ought to create the opportunity to promote it, but we shouldn't be doing it. Needless to say, I will not be voting for cloture on this, and I will reemphasize again, Senator Durbin and I had a great amendment. Those that signed the conference report that took that out can't stand up and say anything about anybody that's wealthy in this country or the tax rates or anything else, because you just gutted one of the things that would have really put back equality in terms of the farm program for the very, very wealthy in this country. We're continuing to pay hundreds of millions, if not billions, monthly to the most well-connected, well-financed, wealthiest people in this country because they're farming the farm program. And taking that out, you lose all moral authority to ever say anything again about income inequality in this country, because you chose, those that signed the conference report, to take that out. So we understand how politics works. I understand how politics works. But credibility is important in our country, and we're losing it. We're losing it here. We're losing it. You just look at the polls. We've lost it in the nation's capital as far as the American people are concerned. And we haven't just lost credibility. We're losing legitimacy because we wink and nod and do the parochial vote, even though in the best long-term interest of our country, we're doing the wrong thing. But it sure sells well at home. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I have one unanimous consent request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It has the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that this request be agreed to and that this request be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak on two matters. The first is the Farm Bill, and the second is the U.S. Attorney situation in my state, the state of Minnesota. Being a senator from a state that is a leader in agricultural products and now the sixth biggest state in terms of agricultural exports, I can tell you that the agriculture sector of this country is strong, and it has in fact been a jewel in this economy when you look over the last a few years and you look at the industries that were hit so hard during the downturn. Our food supply remains strong, and part of why it remains strong is that we have believed in investing in agriculture and agricultural research, in the next wave of machinery and all kinds of things, and it has helped our country, and it has been a positive for our country. We have 80,000 farms in Minnesota. We are an exporting state, and it's one of the major reasons that our unemployment rate is down to 4.6%, because it's not just about the small farmers all over our state. It's also about the businesses. It's also about the employees. And it's also about the fact that it's a country that makes our own food and that we are not dependent on foreign food the way we're dependent on foreign oil. I fought hard to get on the Agriculture Committee when I came to the Senate. I was honored to serve on the Farm Bill Conference Committee under Senator Stabenow's leadership. And we worked together, as you know, on a bipartisan basis to put together a farm bill that strengthens the safety net for our nation's family farmers, preserves critical food and nutrition programs, and brings down the deficit over the last farm bill to the tune of over $20 billion, which is one of the reasons we wanted to put this new farm bill in place. The bulk of the savings comes from that transition from those direct agricultural subsidies to a more risk-based management system of crop insurance. We also worked hard in the conservation area, very important in my state. Hunting and fishing are a way of life. The conservation provisions, we streamlined those programs from 23 to 10 and have the support of hundreds of environmental and conservation groups, including Pheasants Forever, which is based in Minnesota, as well as Ducks Unlimited. We also worked hard in the energy area to finally fund that title, to acknowledge that we need many sources of energy in this country, including biofuels, including wind, including solar, and that's a big part of this bill as well. We kept the nutrition program strong despite the fact that we were up against $40 billion suggested in cuts from the House of Representatives, and found a way to make some changes that might not have been our top priority, but they were ways that we were able to move on the Farm Bill and work with some of these states that were leveraging their heating assistance for food stamps. Most states were not affected by this. My state was not affected by this. We also provided permanent disaster relief for our nation's livestock producers, something that was very important when you look at all the dead cows in South Dakota and everything that happened there. I believe the strength of this bill is a testament to the work and leadership of Chairman Stabenow for her tireless efforts. I want to thank Senator Cochran, as well as Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Peterson from my state, and then also Congressman Tim Walz, who served on the conference committee as well. This bill is important to the farmlands of our country, but it also is good for rural economies. I believe we do right by ourselves when we do right by our rural communities. And I was listening to my colleague from Oklahoma, and I too have been on combines with farmers. I will say I wasn't driving that combine, which wouldn't have been good for the farm or the neighboring farms. I was a passenger, but I heard a different story from my farmers in terms of the concern that we bounce year to year and not know what the policies is, that how good it has been to have a 5-year policy in place for farm policy, how far we've come from those Freedom to Farm days when we were foreclosing on farms all over our state, and how we want to be able to continue to produce food in our state and to encourage young farmers and ranchers. Why that amendment was part of my major focus was to give them some breaks on crop insurance and grazing their cattle on CRP land. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Now I'd like to turn to a very different topic, which is Minnesota's U.S. Attorney. This is an appalling situation, Mr. President, as you will hear by the numbers. For 887 days, Minnesota has not had a full-time permanent U.S. attorney. 887 days. During that time, from August 2011 to August 2013, Todd Jones was responsible for doing two jobs. He was responsible for being the U.S. Attorney in Minnesota and also being the acting director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. As you can imagine, with the mess after Fast and Furious, he had a lot of work to do at the ATF, and that was his major focus. Meanwhile, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota kept going with some fine prosecutors, but we didn't have a full-time leader. Over the summer, thanks to my colleague over there from the state of Arizona, Senator McCain, we were able to finally confirm Todd Jones to that job. The ATF had been without an acting permanent director, without a permanent director, for 7 years. We got that done, and of course then it officially left the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's position open, even though it had really been already open for 2 years. Even before that decision was made by the Senate to confirm Todd Jones, Senator Franken and I had gathered together a bipartisan group, including the former U.S. Attorney under President Bush, to advise us on a replacement for Mr. Jones, even before the time we confirmed Mr. Jones, because of our concern over the problems in the office, many of which were on the front page of our newspaper. We were able to get a recommendation from our committee for a replacement, Mr. Andy Lugar. He is a respected litigator, former assistant U.S. attorney. It has now been 196 days since we made that recommendation to the President. It has been 187 days since Director Jones was confirmed with no full-time U.S. attorney again in the office. While the office has continued to provide the United States with the high-quality legal representation it deserves, Minnesota needs a full-time U.S. attorney. Mr. Lugar sailed through the Judiciary Committee with no objections. He has passed all the tests necessary here, including the FBI test. He has the support of law enforcement that I've spoken with, has the support of one of our Republican congressmen in the area. I want to thank Senator Grassley, who also supports him and has raised issues with the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office because of the fact that we haven't had a full-time attorney for 888 days. And he has been supportive of our efforts to quickly move Mr. Lugar's nomination, not just through the committee, but to the floor. Senator Grassley is in a similar situation because his U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Iowa was nominated on the same day and is also awaiting a confirmation on the floor. Again, they have both come through the Judiciary Committee without any objection. So why is this important? Well, I ran a prosecutor's office of about 400 people for 8 years. We worked directly with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We were there during 9/11, when the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota was dealing with the Moussaoui case. As you remember, he was caught in Minnesota. They were dealing with terrorism issues. We worked hand in hand. We took a number of their white-collar cases, and I've been able to witness firsthand how day in and day out you need a U.S. attorney to make very difficult decisions on what cases to go forward on, and especially without a full-time U.S. attorney, it is very difficult to decide where to put limited resources in terms of strategic decisions. And we haven't had that person in place for 888 days. Protecting our nation from terrorists is a top concern from all of us. And you might not think, Mr. President, when you hear of the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office, you might not think terrorism. But in fact, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota is renowned for its counterterrorism efforts and terrorism prosecutions, especially investigating the terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. For years, authorities have been on alert for Al-Shabaab in Minnesota. In Operation Rhino, the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuted Omar Abdi Mohammed, who recruited young Somali Americans to fight for terrorists in Somalia. Mohammed was indicted in November 2009 in Minnesota and pled guilty in July 2011 to conspiracy to murder, kidnap, and maim abroad. This operation is part of an ongoing terrorism investigation. As you know, there has been suicide bombings in Somalia sadly recruiting people out of our Somalian community in Minnesota. We are proud of that community. They're an incredible part of our state. But this did happen. It has led to charges against 18 people for aiding al-Shabaab, 8 of whom have been convicted, some receiving sentences of up to 20 years in prison. So I ask you, Mr. President, why would you pick an office like this not to have a leader for 888 days? But through a variety of circumstances, the fact that the ATF job was held up in terms of an appointment, and then the fact that this is being held up right now, we still don't have a leader. In addition to terrorism cases, the U.S. Attorney's Office is also responsible for prosecuting major drug crimes. Recently, the office won a major conviction and played a key role in shutting down a big synthetic drug store in Duluth. And 2 weeks ago, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune had a major news story about a growing and deadly heroin epidemic in Minnesota. As we've seen from the death this weekend of someone who is a celebrity, I think we all know there's also been heroin deaths all over this country, so Minnesota is not alone. But we are alone in that we have not had a chief leader in our U.S. Attorney's Office to come up with a strategy to deal with this case for 888 days. In the first half of 2013, 69 people died of opiate-related overdoses in Hennepin County, Minnesota. That would be 69 people dying. Some of these deaths were young kids. This is a situation that demands attention immediately, and Mr. Lugar is eager to work with law enforcement on a strategy. Federal and state law enforcement also partner to combat identity theft and white-collar crime. Minnesota had the second biggest white-collar conviction in terms of money next to Madoff in the country. Yet this is an office that we have chosen not to put a leader in for 888 days. The U.S. Attorney's Office won a conviction in a $3.65 billion Ponzi scheme case, as I mentioned, the second biggest scheme in U.S. history. Currently, Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office is headed by an acting director, but an acting director simply can't provide the same kind of leadership as a full-time U.S. attorney. I know that the local heads of the DEA, FBI, and other federal, state, and law enforcement agencies are very anxious to get a U.S. attorney in full-time. I would also note that we also don't have an administrative officer because we are awaiting putting in a U.S. attorney so that Mr. Lugar can hire an administrative office. This is not a small office. There are more than 100 people working there, including 54 lawyers, and again, they are without a full-time boss and a leader. I think these hard-working prosecutors and the people they work with deserve a leader in the office. When Minnesota was first made a state, President Zachary Taylor filled the position of U.S. Attorney in 2 days for our young new state. Back then, they deserved a U.S. Attorney. If they could get it done in 2 days, I think we should be able to get it done in 888 days. I urge my colleagues to support his swift confirmation and give this office and its hardworking prosecutors the full-time prosecutor that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arizona.
I'd like to make remarks about the Farm Bill Conference agreement that's before us. Of course, across the nation, Americans are demanding that